everyone. You are listening to the latest Flyers Talk podcast presented by Great Railing. I am Jordan Hall, and as always, I am joined by the wonderful Taryn Hatcher and the dynamic Joe Fordyce. We're going to continue our lineup series here where we predict the lineup for the Flyers for the 2021-22 season. We looked at the top six among the four groups last episode. This episode, we're going to look at the bottom six for the forwards. So, Joe Fordyce, I will start with you. Who do you like on the third line? We'll start with that. And also maybe a sleeper for the third line as well.
So I would say for the third line, I'm looking at Scott Laughton in the middle with Joel Farabee and Oscar Lindblom on the wings. Now, the thing I will say about this, and we talked a lot about this the other day, I don't know that this is the ideal lineup for the Flyers. I think this is what it'll be, but I kind of feel like, and this is my sleeper for the third line, is JVR on the third line with him playing number one power play. We talked about this yesterday, or not yesterday, but earlier this week we talked about it, and just how JVR kind of excelled on that third line at even strength. And that's a good depth goal scoring to have down there on your third line. And I think that would work well. So JVR would be my sleeper to play on the third line. But I think that they'll go into the season with Farabee and Lindblom on the wings and Scott Laughton in the middle. Scott Laughton really is a player that is such a Swiss Army knife for this team. He could play top six. He could play the fourth line. He could play anywhere he's asked. And he gives you the same effort every night. You never, after a game, you never look back and go, man, where was Scott Laughton tonight? I feel like you notice Scott every game. And I really think that he's one of those players who galvanizes other players. So I think the players that play with him, they really buy in. And I always think it's good for other players to play with a guy like Scott Laughton. So, I think that'll be the line. And we talked the other day about Joel Farabee being a sleeper to play on the first line. So obviously that stuff is interchangeable, I think. I feel like Laughton and Lindblom are pretty much mainstays there. Potentially Lindblom to move up. Obviously injuries and things like that happen. But I would say Laughton, Lindblom, and Farabee with JVR as the sleeper to be a third line player, not necessarily due to lack of performance in the top six, but due to him having played that role before where you play the bottom six at even strength, but that number one power play, because that's obviously JVR's bread and butter. So that's what I would go with for the third line.
I like that. And I think the really good thing about Joel Farabee is he can play either wing. So he can play right or left wing, and that would allow Oscar Lindblom to obviously play left wing on the third line. I think both are traditionally or naturally left wingers, but Farabee can definitely play both. And that would really give them a nice little third line there with a hard to play against center and two young wingers, still young. One that's really proven himself and one that's trying to get back to where he was, obviously before his shocking cancer diagnosis that really unfortunately set him back in some ways physically. But nice line there. Taryn Hatcher, what are you thinking for that third line and a sleeper?
Mine would be pretty similar to Joe's, but I would say that I think the hope for me, and not at all a reflection on JVR and me saying this, but more a reflection on like my hopes for Joel based on how he played last season. I would like to see Joel develop into a position where he's threatening that top six all the time and probably moves into that top six consistently, just because I like a line as a quote unquote third line that's not really a third line of Scott, JVR, and Lindblom, because you also get a little bit of something out of all these guys that I think will complement each other. Scott's kind of like that gritty, high motor, high energy guy. Physically will get involved and mix things up a little bit. And we saw how much JVR, when he moves his skates last year, just how much even better his hands look, and we know how good they are. And then you have a high IQ player like Oscar, who I think if he comes into the season and gets that full off season under his belt training wise, that I like the idea of having Oscar, who's this guy who sees the ice really well, and Scott, who's this guy who's never going to stop working to get into the right spots, and JVR is a player who's got these really tremendous hands. I would like to see that together against another team's bottom six, because it should give the Flyers a massive edge in that department. But that also predicates on either Joel playing kind of out of his skates and breaking into the top six, which would also mean, I mean, that in and of itself should reflect positively on the Flyers at some point in the season. Or, you know, if God forbid Joel struggles, you know, you can give him some breaks on the fourth line where maybe he doesn't play quite as many minutes in certain games, because that's the other thing that will be interesting with Joel, is that last season's schedule was hard on everyone. The season before obviously wasn't a full schedule because of COVID. And when you play college hockey, you don't play a full schedule that's as long as an NHL season. So it'll be interesting to see if Joel physically at any point hits some kind of wall this upcoming year. I would hope not. But if you have a good working line of Scott, Lindblom, and JVR at some point, that gives you a lot of leeway to give guys kind of breathers on that fourth line where they don't have to take on as many minutes if you're talking about a young guy, you know, like Joel, who I think last year we saw him play really well at times and play very poorly, quite frank, at other times. And those are the kind of nights where you allow AV to give this guy a blow rather than drag down, you know, a talented third line. So I would like to see that, but to Joe's point today, and even more so last week when he said, you know, the thing is that I think if you're AV, even though he's Mr. Accountability and he's Mr. like do this objectively in terms of his approach to ice time and where guys play, I think you kind of have to start with JVR in that top six based off of A, how he played last year, B, how much he makes, and C, his veteran status within the team and his abilities, quite frankly. But I would like to see Joel earn his way up there, because I think JVR on that third line would sneaky make it really hard to play against.
Yeah, I think that really will be a good battle of who is the second line left wing. Will it be Farabee? Will it be JVR? Like you
or
said,
Oscar, even.
Or even Oscar, Karen. Exactly. Man, JVR has so much experience, had a really good year last year, was one of their best players. There's no doubt about that. And he plays well with other playmakers as well. So yeah, it should be a really good battle. Mine looks a little different. I did have Joel Farabee on my second line left wing, so I'm going to have JVR on my third line left wing. And then I have Scott Laughton down the middle, and I actually have Wade Allison on my third line right wing. I think that just allows everyone to play their proper spots on the third and fourth line. I think Scott Laughton is the third line center. But he can play wing or center, as we know. He's such a Swiss Army knife, as Joe mentioned. That is spot on. And I will say my sleeper there, I would say, is Morgan Frost. I think Morgan Frost will push for a roster spot, and he's not a fourth line player. The Flyers have said that, and we know that. And he doesn't have a spot open in the top six.
I like Morgan. I think Morgan's got a ways to go. I mean, I don't know what he looks like this year, so I shouldn't say that. But I don't want to cut you off. Keep going, and I'll speak my piece later.
No, I don't think he's going to make the opening night lineup. Could he make the opening night roster? Probably not. I think he will end up starting in Lehigh Valley, and obviously he went pretty much all of last season without playing other than 2 games because of the shoulder injury. So I think the Flyers are going to want him with the Phantoms, proving himself, playing games before he's put back into the NHL lineup. And they have much better depth this year within their forwards compared to last year. And obviously last year allowed him to start on the roster because of COVID and where the Phantoms were. They weren't ready to have a season yet, all of that stuff. But I will say sleeper because maybe Morgan Frost has a dynamic camp. Maybe he shows, hey, he's ready to provide offense and play center, give them depth. He's not a fourth line player, and he's not going to have a spot in their top 6. What I think that could do is say Morgan Frost wins a job down the middle. Then maybe it allows Scott Laughton to play wing on the third line, or it allows Scott Laughton to play fourth line center. Nate Thompson's their extra forward, and suddenly they look really deep down the middle with Scott Laughton playing a really big role in the fourth line, or he's playing wing where they've liked him a lot in the past. He's a good winger. He can play either wing. preferably I think left. So that's my sleeper. Morgan Frost maybe blows down the door in training camp, says I'm ready to play now and provide offense, provide a jolt, and I'm allowed. And maybe he gives the Flyers more lineup flexibility with Scott Laughton moving around a little bit. That would be my sleeper, a true sleeper, not a guy that I think is going to do it. But hey, maybe
like
that
a deep,
comes
like
down.
a deep REM sleeper, like a
Yes.
deep REM slumber.
Exactly.
I like the thing that's tough for Morgan, and I really like Morgan, and I think at first, what like his very first cluster of games, when he was obviously like he was scoring, what did he score 2 games in a row just in his first 2 games, and it was whatever.
Yeah, he had 3 points and 2 goals in his first 2 games.
First 2 games, right?
Yeah.
And the thing that's tough with Morgan is that, like you said, I don't think they want to bring him in as a bottom 6 guy. He's not his skill level when it comes to certain things is better than that. But he like in order for him to earn consistent NHL time, he has to kind of put more pieces together more consistently. And obviously he had the injury this past year, and you can't fault him for that. And it was one of those, just like Kutz's play, it was one of those weird plays where it's like, this play is going to be a season-ending injury for someone. It's so strange, but he has to put things together. It's almost like his combination of skill and I don't know how big he is right now, but he certainly, when he came into the league, was very slight and really needed to put on muscle if he wanted to stay out there against some of these guys he's going to be playing against. It's going to be harder, I think, for him to put it all together than some other guys, because you look at like a Nick Aubé-Kubel, right? And he's not the skill level that Morgan Frost has when it comes to certain things, but he's also like kind of a grinder guy, and he can slot right into that 4th line. And he doesn't have to put as many pieces together in a specific kind of way in order to consistently get NHL ice time. When they were happy with him and thought he could consistently be on the roster, it was just about him being physical, moving his skates, not making bad decisions. When it comes to Morgan, you want to put him all together in a top 6 spot. Well, that means that physically he's probably got to be a little bit more engaged than he's been and against other top 6 guys. That's the thing that scares me with Morgan, is that I still think he needs to put on weight based on what I saw last year. And hopefully, that recovery from the shoulder injury is completely healed and fine. We all wish nothing but the best of health for him, but he is in a tough spot in terms of where they would like to put him, his God-given gifts, and also some of his kind of just natural, like raw materials, that he's not the hugest guy. And if you're going to put him in the top 6, he's physically got to compete with another team's top 6. That's just, it's tough. It's tough for a teenager to do. Yeah. It's tough for, I know he's not a teenager anymore, but like a young guy who's not fully grown into like his body and how muscular he can be and putting on mass.
He's got to go on the Cam Atkinson plan. He's got to get with Cam, and this is how you fully embrace being a small guy on the wing.
Exactly.
I'd say that funny, but I also mean it. He's embraced a guy like Cam, who is, an undersized player, but constantly plays around the net. He'll take a little bit of a beating and score goals for it in front of the net.
Cam's like, you meet Cam, he's physically solid. That's the thing that scares me about.
That's what Morgan needs to become.
Yeah.
He needs to go at training camp, and whenever he can, go to Cam Atkinson and say, how do I become you, essentially, or this sort of physical presence? Yeah. And that's how that's how he's gonna make it in this league. Because as you said, he has to be able to compete on the other end of the ice with top 6 players. And, that's not an easy thing. And it's also something that can't be understated, because there's plenty of guys that score goals, and you need to have that other side of your game if you're going to play top 6 minutes in this league. And, it's a shame that I was thinking this as you were talking, Taryn. Morgan was one of those guys where the Flyers bring them up and they're kind of like anointed a great player before they ever step on an NHL game, But and you think about a guy like Wade Allison, he was brought up and it was like, okay, let's see what he can do. But nobody said like, this guy's awesome. And then look what he did in his time. And it was kind of like, okay, now he's showing what he can do. Now let's give him the high fives, or let's give him the standing ovation after he shows some of what he can do on an NHL rink. Whereas Morgan got that before he ever stepped on an NHL rink. And I think that kind of plays with young players' heads. I really do. And we've seen it with this organization in particular several times over the years. So I feel like everybody, like the cliche is like pump the brakes. Everybody needs to just back up a little bit and say, like, let's let this kid develop. He's not Connor McDavid. Let's not reach constantly for Connor McDavid and Austin Matthews. And there's two of those guys.
Yeah.
That's it. And let's just see what he can develop into before we start talking about how many goals he can score in an NHL season and those kinds of things before they ever play.
And even when you watch, even when the Flyers weren't in a position to make a playoff spot, or even games where they didn't win, but Wade played well, Wade played with excitement. And the thing that always concerned me about Morgan was after those first few games, I felt like this. Morgan never told me this, but this is when I was still on the road with the team. It felt like Morgan played with pressure. And that's exactly to that kind of dichotomy that you were talking about, Joe, is that when the pedestal is higher, there's more real estate to break it down. And when the pedestal is low, a guy kind of gets to gradually build up his confidence in his game. And Morgan's pedestal has always been high, I think partially because like you look at his hands and how quick his release is and some of those things. And it just always was like, okay, let's watch him let's wait for him to do this thing. Everybody hold your breath. Let's wait until he does this thing. And it's like, well, he might not do that tonight. So that's where it has to come in and be like, all right, Morgan, if you're not going to like flash these crazy quick hands and this, that, and the next thing every game, then you can't shy away from physicality, which I will say, I thought in 2020 was one of the biggest pitfalls of his game, is that I thought sometimes it looked like he shied away from physicality. Whereas Joel at times engaged in physicality to a point of it not being necessary. And that's when the coaches would tell me like, yeah, sometimes we have to tell Joel, like, we get it, please don't hurt yourself, whatever. And I don't know, I'd have to go back and watch like that little sample size of Morgan this past season. But I think the recency bias of Morgan getting injured and it being pretty obvious to me that that physical part of his game still very much was where he was probably outmatched the year before, is where the two things colliding is where I get concerned. But he's older, he should be bigger. It's just one of these things where like Joel, I don't think Joel got like his adult hockey player physique until this past season, and that's just the start of it for him. I think Morgan still from last year was still pretty small, and he'll grow into it. Like we talk about Danny Briere being small, but like if you see Danny Briere even today out on a golf course, like Danny Briere is still like built more like an adult than Morgan Frost was last year. So it'll be interesting to see. But yeah, Jordan, what a conversation you stoked here.
Yeah, and I will just add this too, like to the whole point of guys being anointed. We're in the business of that, right? We need stuff to talk about. Taryn and I need stuff for pregame shows, and you want to talk about things. And I'll bring up a guy like Tanner Lazinski. When he played last season, what did we talk about in the pregame show? Hey, remember that between the legs goal he scored with the Phantoms? And then all of a sudden there becomes this thing like, well, maybe he'll come out and do that in an NHL arena, but maybe he won't. Yeah. Because how many guys do that on an NHL, do that in an NHL game? Not that many. So it's this sort of level of unfair expectation that is put on some of these guys before they ever play. And I don't know what makes, and maybe it's the dazzling sort of, it's more of the dazzling stuff than the hardworking stuff that gets the headlines before they get to the league. And Wade Allison is more of the hardworking. He does more of the hardworking stuff than the between the leg goals or the lightning quick hands and the things that have people and media members and anointing guys as the second coming before they ever step on an NHL surface. And, I think there's a little bit of that with Morgan. And there was a little bit of that with Tanner, but that's, the player, the team has to ignore what people say and just develop the player outside of what, what I say, what Taryn says, what anybody that writes in the papers or websites say.
Yeah, Morgan Frost was the classic undersized junior hockey player that put up 100-point seasons, but obviously that his style of play, his game, it takes time to translate to the NHL. Some people also wonder, will it translate to the NHL? Like that style of play where it's like flashy offense, playmaking down the middle. But as you guys alluded to, not as much 200-foot play. And not everyone has to be a 200-foot player. Not everyone's going to be Sean Couturier, but Alain Vigneault and the coaching staff, they do like 200-feet qualities. And yeah, you have to have some of them. And he also plays a position with fewer spots, center. But I think with Nolan Patrick, there was a long-standing debate when Nolan Patrick was here was, well, where does Morgan Frost even fit? They have 3 centers above him, and he's not a fourth-line player. Nolan Patrick's no longer here. Maybe that opens up the door a little bit more for Morgan Frost. But as you guys alluded to, he will have to prove himself, show that he can play more than just that flashy offensive style. Can he affect the game in other ways? But he will have his chance in training camp to maybe open some eyes, and he has the abilities to open eyes. Like he does the things that catch your eye, and that's make plays and produce offense. And they always say, if you produce offense, if you create points and goals, they'll find a place for you. So we'll see if he can carve out his spot, but it should be fun. I'm glad it sparked some debate. Flyers Talk is brought to you by Great Railing. Stop into Great Railing for the highest quality and lowest prices on all your railing, decking, and fencing needs. All right, well, let's shift gears to the fourth line. I think there's going to be a plenty of debate there as well. Joe Fordyce, what are you thinking for the Flyers' fourth line and maybe a sleeper to grab a role there as well?
So I'll say Nate Thompson in the middle with Nick Aubé-Kubel. I think those two are clear. For that other spot, I think things are – it's very interesting with the fourth line on this team because generally, outside of the Islanders, the fourth line is a line where you want them to go out, play soundly, and not try to do too much. I say that outside of the Islanders. So, I think those two are a mainstay, and the other guy, I think it could really be a revolving door. Looking up and down the roster, like, you see a guy like Jackson Cates, played a few games, wasn't spectacular, but he kind of played when he was there. When he was up, he played. And with Morgan not really being an option for that, I'm going to say Jackson Cates.
Okay.
I feel like some of these guys that got little cups of coffee in the league last year, some of those guys have to be elevated to an NHL level to see if they basically to see if they can hack it. And that's really what the fourth line is all about. And we mentioned the style of play with Morgan not really fitting in with a fourth line. I think you can find one of these other guys. And I misspoke. Jackson Cates is my sleeper. Wade Allison is my fourth line player.
Joe, you stole mine. I was hoping you'd stick with Jackson. I was like, this guy's forgetting about Wade.
I skipped right to sleeper. But Wade Allison, I think, is the fourth line, and I think he will. The way he plays, he will challenge for upper minutes, throughout the season. I just don't see, how he doesn't do that. So Wade would be my guy because he for sure earned it. And my sleeper would, without a doubt, be Jackson Cates, only because I don't think there's another guy in the minors or a guy that's about to crack the league that fits on a fourth line. I don't think Tanner Laczynski fits on a fourth line. We mentioned, obviously, Morgan Frost not fitting on a fourth line. So I don't know. I mean, that's what I would go with. I would go with Jackson Cates as my sleeper. With Wade Allison on the one wing there with Nick Aubé-Kubel. And I will say this, if Nick Aube-Kubel plays like he played late last season, there could be two sleepers on this line. Because if Nick Aube-Kubel comes out and plays the style where he's taking penalties 150 feet from his own net, I don't know that AV is going to put up with that very long, because some of those penalties that Nick took late last season directly led to goals that cost them games, and there's no way to argue against that. And I think the easiest way to get yourself out of an NHL lineup is to take penalties 100, 150 feet from your own net. That stuff will drive coaches crazy, and it'll get you benched pretty quickly. And we've seen AV is not hesitant to do such.
Yeah, I think Alain Vigneault's patience ran so thin with him that he might be fighting for his lineup spot in training camp. I don't think anything's going to be given to him. I really think they have the depth that they're going to want to see him earn that spot. Like, he is not a set in stone kind of guy. That's just my opinion.
The only thing I'll say, Jordan, is I think Nick is, outside of the questionable decisions with the penalties, his makeup as a player is tailor-made for a fourth line.
It is.
So that's why I think, he's kind of a mainstay there in that fourth line. But again, the fastest way to get your way out of the lineup is to take bad penalties. And he has a track record of already doing that, taking bad penalties that directly cost them goals, that directly cost them games. And that kind of lineage will get you right out of the lineup in the NHL.
Yeah, when he's going right, he's north-south. He's forechecking you to death, and teams love that in their bottom six and their fourth line. Taryn Hatcher, how about you? What are you thinking fourth line-wise in sleeper?
I think fourth line to start is Nate Thompson center, Wade Allison, Nick Aube-Kubel on the wings. My sleeper for this is, I'm going to go a little bit different when I do this, is that if anybody is out of that fourth line, it is going to be Nick Aube-Kubel. I think Wade Allison has showed, I think it seems like the guys enjoy playing with Wade Allison. They enjoy the style of, hustle and, willingness to be a grinder and willingness to also like flash some skill and, really assert yourself as a goal scorer a little bit in the small sample size we had last year. And I think that the issue to what both of you were saying is that I think Nick Aube-Kubel, and it's a new year, and I'm sure that there'll be a bit of clean slate approach to the fresh start. But the problem with Nick Aube-Kubel has been, and even outside of games, was that mentally it seems like he just isn't there sometimes. Like you wonder about his decision making, and it's not just limited to bad penalties at times. Like Joe said, the thing with Nick is that and I know I said this when we talked about Morgan just now, when AV was ready to commit to Nick as being a full-time NHLer, part of it was that he felt like he had this combination of things that Nick had put together night in and night out that would make him the type of player that can contribute for his skill set consistently. And that skill set, if you read through the lines, is that he can be a bottom six guy that grinds, that's physical. I mean, he had a Gordie Howe hat trick like 2 years ago. He's got this physicality to his game and this hustle to his game, and he's kind of unassuming as a player. I don't think he expects anything other than what he puts in is what he gets out. The problem is sometimes what he puts in isn't good, and then what comes out of it is bad also. And I just think unless there is a certain amount of maturity mentally with him within his game, I'm not talking about Nick being like a dingus or anything, I'm just saying like within his game, that Nick is going to have more of a pressure cooker situation than Wade does. Because I mean, Wade came into the game as an adult. He had gone through college all the way through, had dealt with an injury, came in, had a certain level of maturity, comes from really humble background, like the whole deal, that is just blue collar, lunch pail kind of player. And we haven't seen him make those mistakes. Like Wade's mistakes were that at first he couldn't finish goals. Like he was putting himself in great position for goals and couldn't finish. But he hasn't had mental lapses. And again, sample size is small. So That's kind of more my sleeper than any one player, is that I think the revolving door could have a lot more to do with Nick than even, us talking about Nate Thompson being the extra forward. I think if there's a situation where there's an extra kind of guy down the middle or guy down the left, other things get moved around and Nate gets kept in and Nick comes out, because you've got a lot, as we've said before, when you look at Claude, when you look at Scott, when you look at a number of players on this roster, you can put them in the middle, you can put them on the left, you can put them on the right. We're pretty stacked down the left currently. There's a lot of movement that you could make that would allow you to keep Wade in, keep Nate in, and slot Nick out if we start to see, because the concern was that with Nick, it looked habitual last year. It looked like he developed bad habits. So unless those habits are mentally broken, which is difficult, but they've had a long off season, so hopefully there's time to break it, then I think there could be issues. So that's my sleeper in that situation.
I like it. Yeah, Nicholas Aube-Kubel, it's like Taryn was saying, I feel like he works hard, but he doesn't always work smart. And that's where the penalties came in. And you can't, in a fourth line role, when you're on the ice as so much lesser than other people, you can't lead the team in penalties taken. You just can't. And that's what happened. And that's going to get you out of the lineup. It's going to get you, it's going to get the coaching staff starting to question your play and how smart you are. Like, those guys need to be smart. And it burned them. And yeah, I think if there's one player that really took advantage of audition time last year, it was Wade Allison. The Flyers totally opened the curtain for auditions last year. They had everyone come up and say and play, and they gave them all chances because their season was lost. And they said, show us what you can do. Wade Allison was the one that aced his audition. He got into the lineup and he stayed there. He played 14 games and really set himself up well for training camp and to earn a spot. I actually had him on my third line, so that shows you what I think of him and what he did last year. For me, I don't love what I have on left wing, fourth line. I have Oscar there. That's purely because I have everyone slotted in their traditional left wing spots, and that just naturally puts Oscar on the fourth line. I don't know if he'll start on the fourth line, but I think he can play on a fourth line role, and maybe that takes a little more pressure off of him to start the season and allow him to climb. So for me, I have Oscar Lindblom on the fourth line left wing. I have Nate Thompson down the middle, and I have Nicholas Aube-Kubel on the right wing. I think he should be there. He can be there. But I agree with Joe and Taryn here. I really do think he's fighting for his spot. I think he was put squarely on the hot seat when Wade Allison came up and showed what he did. My sleeper is Tanner Laczynski because he can play both wings and he can play center. And they liked him in the bottom six. He played fourth line when he came up and got that cup of coffee. He's a real smart kid. He's well-groomed, 4-year college player, and he gives them lineup flexibility because he can play the wing. He can play center. So that would be my sleeper, because I really think he's going to come in and be healthy after going through his injury last year that shut him down. He's going to come in and show his smarts, show that he can help you in different ways. So Tanner Laczynski is my sleeper. But good depth, good. Like, we're talking about depth because it looks like they have some solid depth. They'll have to show it, though. I think there was times where they really lacked depth last year in their forward groups. It's why they were an inconsistent goal-scoring team. I think it's why they gave up a lot of goals, the league most goals, because it started up front. It wasn't just on the D and the goalies. I think it was on forwards as well. They lacked depth, and I think that's why they kind of struggled there in that regard. But
I think that'll be the big thing that we see adjustments when it comes to is when Chuck took over this team, he said one of the main categories he evaluated and really wanted to address was goals given up, goals against. And then the Flyers bounced back a little bit from that. And then last year really went the wrong direction with it. I bet you if we see big forward adjustments, it is not, well, it'll come down to AV, but I would have a feeling that the initial priority becomes addressing forward groups not committing to their defensive assignments, less so than forward groups not, developing offensively. It'll be interesting. I'm interested.
No, it truly will. And like that's going to have to be an emphasis. Like bottom six, a lot of it's about goal prevention. The Flyers allow more goals than anyone in hockey. Their PK was 30th in the league. Like, those are issues. And bottom six guys typically play on your PK a lot, and they have to prevent goals at 5-on-5. So yeah, Taryn, it should be fun. A lot of fun competition for sure.
Also, no one judge me. I'm at my childhood bedroom. So if
And
you're wondering why it looks like I'm in a pink dungeon, I'm at my parents' house. So please excuse the look.
and Taryn's showing the faith in the Phillies too with her hat right there. Taryn believes.
Am I Jordan, or am I just wearing this hat because it matches my outfit? Because I had covered 2 of those games against the Diamondbacks at 1:00 in the morning, and I was pretty mad about both of them. So my faith is a little shaken, Jordan, to be honest with you. That team driving me.
Hey, I think Flyers fans are saying go Flyers, right? Right now, with kind of where things are, Eagles coming off that. Let's not even get into it. Well, we won't even get into it. But we did get into
let's talk about the Ben Simmons trade possibilities while we're here. Let's really get the people going. Let's get it going.
I'll just say the Phillies as a team only had a few more hits than Taryn had during that series. So, in total.
I hit things, Joe. I hit things. I might have had more than them. I hit things.
You may have.
I grabbed the stick. I grabbed the hockey stick that's in studio, and I was like, I am going to throw this at something pretty soon. And it was left-handed, so it was perfect. I was really in my sweet spot with it. Oh, I really could have. If I had a puck to hit, all those cameras would have gone out.
Yeah.
Truthfully. Although my aim's not great.
Or a crossbar to hit too.
And our one podcast producer just said Ben Simmons isn't getting traded. He'll be at Philly at the start of camp. And so there you go, guys. You can take that and debate it with the rest of everything else we've talked about to get your fires.
That should make for a fun training camp.
Yeah, exactly. A big take there from Ben Berry, our podcast.
You know what I appreciate, though, is that this is really off topic, but you know what? Forget it. This is how it goes in the newsroom. So you guys get a peek into really how things go. Is that Ben Simmons right immediately after saying, I'm not going to go to the Olympics because I want to stay home and work out, posted 4 videos from his pool over the next 4 days. And I was like, maybe let's focus on the work. Everybody's stop posting videos of you shooting, stop posting videos of you working out. We just want to see it on the court during games, whatever. I'm like, now would be the time to post those videos of you shooting some threes in the gym. And then now he switched it back over to the workout photos, where I was like, the timing of the statement and the timing of the Instagram stories are not a good combination. Not that it's really rough. Yeah. It's just read the room a little bit, I should have when I wore this hat.
It matches your pillows, Taryn, in your childhood bedroom. Solid choice there.
My mom put this in here. This isn't me. This is not my aesthetic, just for the record.
I don't know if we believe that. It looks like that's something.
I hit you as a Victorian floral.
The hat you're wearing matches the pillow.
No, the hat I'm wearing is very Hawaii inspired.
Minus the palm tree.
This is Victorian cottage core. Okay, this podcast has gone so far off where we were supposed to be.
Taryn, that's why I said I liked your hat, because I knew it had the Hawaii vibes for you, that Hawaii glare. And but anyway, we will stop with the Ben Simmons talk and the Phillies talk. We will stick with Flyers. We predict the entire forward lineup, and our next episode we will get into the deep pairs. So I'm glad we're doing this. It's been fun, and it's definitely getting us ready for September training camp. Taryn Hatcher, thank you so much as always. Joe Fordyce, thank you as always. Special thank you to Ben Berry, our podcast producer as well, and for his Ben Simmons take. And Flyers fans, as always, thank you for listening to the latest Flyers Talk podcast presented by Great Railing. Wherever you get your podcasts, please rate and listen, and we cannot wait to talk to you next time.